Hello and welcome to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast number 47. This week I'm answering some feedback from a previous show, as well as looking at feedback from last week's podcast, and as promised, I'm reviewing 2 Tom Baker Big Finish audios. Do Daleks really sign contracts? How do they hold the pen? And so to this week's feedback. I've received several bits of feedback this week, 2 relating to an earlier podcast and 2 from last week's show.
Come here, you scrumptious little beauty. A box?
Doctor, what is it?
I've got mail.
The first feedback I received during the week came in relation to an earlier podcast that I posted on iTunes. I probably should explain that I've been posting the podcast on iTunes at a rate of as many as I can each month until the iTunes feed catches up with the Facebook page. So in mid-January I posted a number of shows including my review of Time of the Doctor. And it's that show that this feedback from Andrew Marmot is addressing. He said, "As I'm listening on iTunes, I'm a little behind the Facebook podcast, but this morning I listened to your Day of the Doctor cast, and a couple of thoughts I had are here. 1. Don't stop making the podcast. Just because you don't always get many responses to your requests, it doesn't mean that we're not listening. I don't often comment, as I'm never sure I have anything interesting to say." Well, thanks for that, Andrew. It's a valid point to add to the other very positive comments I received when I raised that question. The second point that Andrew makes is this. Story, he says, is king. In any form of media, if you sacrifice story for anything pleasing, you'll pay the price. It may not be what you want as a fan, but as long as it services the story, it's always the right thing to do. Normally, Andrew, I would agree. In the everyday run-of-the-mill episodes, that's all very true. However, for me, the anniversary stories are the exception to the rule. They're there as a celebration of the show and its history. Of course, to have a good storyline is great, but let's face it, the only storyline in Day of the Doctor is the reinstatement of the Time Lords and the rewriting of one of the best behind-the-scenes plots the show has ever seen. Aside from that, it was a fan-fest of references to the show's past, both recent and long-term, and in my opinion, that's exactly what it should be. Andrew's third point was this. The Bad Wolf as the moment is perfect. We've said goodbye to Rose quite a few times, possibly too many, but let's not get into that now. And I felt it was much better not to have her brought back by some contrived method just for her to say goodbye to the 10th Doctor all over again. The timey-wimey reasoning for the War Doctor and the 10th Doctor not remembering the events is fine, but surely the War Doctor remembers the moment from the beginning before the timelines got fuzzy. Maybe he was repressed in the memory of 9, 10 and 11, hence why the 9th didn't recognise Rose from his past. Well, I have to admit, the more I think about that point, Andrew, the more I agree with it. Perhaps it wasn't right to bring back Rose for David Tennant's Doctor. But why not then have him with Rose or Donna? In fact, to have seen Donna face off to the childlike Matt Smith Doctor would have been fantastic. As for the timey-wimey memory loss, I'm intrigued about that. As in Time Crash, yes, Time Crash is canon, we see Tennant's Doctor remembering how to do something technical because he remembers seeing the 5th Doctor seeing the Tennant Doctor doing it in the first place. Surely that principle can and should be applied to the Eccleston recognising Rose scenario too. Fourthly, Andrew says this. It's not the 4th Doctor's TARDIS. That's all I've got to say about that. My only response to that, Andrew, is spoil sport. But seriously, I'm not sure that it is myself, but my fanboy brain is holding on to the fact that Tom Baker is definitely playing the Fourth Doctor in that scene. Andrew's fifth point relates to the numbering of the Doctors. He says, I think it's clear from the episode that the War Doctor doesn't call himself the Doctor, so he's outside of the numbering. And you're not going to like this, but the meta-crisis does count. It was a regeneration, as it created another Doctor from the handy spare hand. I have to say that I didn't like it at the time of the meta-crisis, as it was obviously a cheap trick from RTD to create a cliffhanger, and I think the Moff has had a stab at trying to make sense of it from a continuity point of view, but perhaps not very successfully. The regeneration process happened, and from a pseudo-Time Lord science point of view, a process took place, only its outcome was different than expected. Okay, I guess there are times within fandom, Andrew, where we're going to have to agree to differ, and I think this is going to be one of those occasions. But that's the beauty of Doctor Who fandom. We all see things slightly differently, and our love for the show stems from the way that we view it as individuals. However, here goes with my two answers for the points that you raise. Firstly, the War Doctor does take the title Doctor at the end of the episode, when he says, I am the Doctor again. Thus, he is number 9. As for the meta-crisis, even going down the line that you suggest, as a purist I can't accept it as a legitimate regeneration. Tennant's Doctor only uses part of the regeneration energy to heal himself, then siphons off the rest. What happens to it after that is irrelevant. The Tennant Doctor himself doesn't regenerate. I'm sure we could argue this one till the cows come home, but sadly the Moff has taken it upon himself to inflict his take on proceedings upon us with the explanation he gives in Time of the Doctor. Thanks for your feedback, Andrew. It's always great to hear what people think, even if it's a different point of view from my own. But as I said earlier, that's the joy of fandom and the reason for feedback. The next feedback I had this week came from Douglas J. Harkins. Douglas has also been catching up with previous podcasts, and here he shares his own thoughts on the Day of the Doctor. He says, I agree with the David Tennant double regeneration. I don't think it should count as a regeneration. If this is counted, then shouldn't Tom Baker drinking the eternal elixir in the brain of Morbius also be counted as a regeneration, where the Doctor didn't change, especially seeing as McGann's Doctor counts as a regeneration when he drank the elixir? Well, I've just given my thoughts on the Doctor's numbering issue, so I won't go through them again, but suffice to say, Douglas, that I completely agree with your thoughts on that one. Douglas goes on to say, one line of thinking for the ageing issue could be that even Time Lord bodies eventually reach a point of entropy. While it may take longer for their body to reach a point of deterioration, eventually they do, as seen with the First Doctor's body, wearing a bit thin. Again with the War Doctor, he lived long enough to show the ageing process. Perhaps a Time Lord can go thousands of years without showing signs of age, but as seen before with the First Doctor and the War Doctor, a Time Lord can eventually age. Given the Doctor's nature of saving the universe and putting himself at a great deal of risk, only 3 of his life cycles have reached the point of physical deterioration due to the age, all the rest regenerated rather young by Time Lord standards. A brilliant thought, Douglas, and I have to say not one that had entered my head in any way, shape or form. Of course the Time Lords are alien, so their ageing process could well be very different to that of us humans. Douglas's final point of view on Day of the Doctor was all about the nudity issue that I'd raised in my view of the episode. He explains it like this. The driving force for the nudity was that the church was a form of security, overwatching the access to the crack from which the message was emanating. To ensure one was not carrying a weapon or a mode of escape to come and go as pleased, such as the TARDIS, onto the planet, one was required to be naked so nothing could be concealed. In order to go to the planet's surface, you had to go through the church being nude so nothing could be concealed, and the security was trained to see past holograms. This is the reason the Doctor shaved his head and wore a wig, so that he could take the TARDIS key to the surface. Security could see through the clothing hologram, but not the wig. Not a brilliant security system then, Douglas. Okay, so I concede there was a plot point to the nudity up to a point. But following that plot point, I still have to ask why there were scenes in the TARDIS and in Clara's home relating to the nudity issue that actually had nothing to do with the security put in place by the Church of the Papal Mainframe, but everything to do with getting cheap laughs. Douglas has commented also on last week's podcast with this. With all my friends' posts and the Doctor Who pages I get news feeds from, I sometimes miss your podcast. Is there a way I can catch up? Well, the best way you can do that, Douglas, and anyone else for that matter who'd like to catch up with some of the past episodes, is to subscribe through iTunes. Just search Theta Sigma and you'll find it there. I should point out that the iTunes feed is playing catch up with the Facebook page, so it is a little behind at the moment, but as soon as it's caught up, I plan to post weekly to both iTunes and the Facebook page. Sadly though, for financial reasons, I'm only using a free server, which means that after 90 days, episodes are deleted. On iTunes at the time of writing, episodes 21 to 40 are all there. Around mid-February, I'll be posting the next set of shows, and I hope that by March the iTunes feed will be running parallel with the Facebook page. Finally, in this week's feedback, we have Michael Doyle. He gives his observations on last week's Silence episode. I have to say that I was never really happy with the whole silence thing. There were too many contradictions in the scripts, too many plot holes, and too many things that were left unanswered. How did the silence blow up the TARDIS? That was never explained, for instance. But ah well, Moff isn't calling me for my opinion. Keep up the good work. Thanks for your thoughts, Michael, and thanks too for your kind comments on the Facebook page. And now, on to the promised Big Finish reviews.
It's Saturday night tea time in 1977 all over again.
So to the Tom Baker audios that I've been promising to review for some time now. The Dalek Contract and the Final Phase comprise the last two stories of Season 2 of the Fourth Doctor Adventures. Though in fairness, to describe them as two separate adventures is a bit of a stretch. What you have in these 4 episodes is, in essence, a classic 70s Tom Baker four-parter.
Spoilers. 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 Spoilers.
Coming soon from Big Finish Productions, The Fourth Doctor Adventures.
Danger, Master! Detecting hostile life forms. Combat mode.
Doctor Who, The Dalek Contract.
Daleks? Ah, now there's a question.
Isn't the Proxima system where the Larn were damaged by Cuthbert's mysterious experiment?
Let's start powering up, shall we? Oh, and you make sure that there are no more attacks.
Exterminate!
The Daleks really do make you nervous, don't they?
What? We'll be flying straight into the lion's mouth, as it were. And there won't exactly be sandwiches and crisps along the way.
Doctor! No!
The Final Phase.
Open sesame.
The Doctor must accede to our demands!
Just hold your horses for now.
The ultimatum has been issued!
No!
Hello, it's me again. Sorry I got cut off now. Where were we?
Keep firing!
It really is a tear in the fabric of space-time, isn't it?
One man's tear is another man's gateway.
Conquest! Conquest! Conquest!
Subscribers get more at bigfinish.com.
We open this story with the Doctor and Romana, as played by the late Mary Tam, bickering about the fact that the Doctor has once again turned off the TARDIS randomizer. However, the Doctor has good reason for doing so, and we're soon plunged into the story and reintroduced to the brilliant character of Cuthbert, as played by David Warner. Now, I'll openly admit that when I'd listened to the previous stories featuring Cuthbert, I really didn't warm to the character. Yes, I know he's playing a villain, and you're not supposed to warm to the villain, but what I mean is I wasn't drawn enough to the character to care whether or not he was defeated. Whether that was down to David Warner's performance or poor scripting, I don't know, but I simply didn't like the Cuthbert character. This time round, however, something about him made me really engage with him. Warner's performance in these 4 episodes is brilliantly understated. There's a quiet menace that shows through Cuthbert's bungling exterior, for example continually referring to Romana as Ramona, that was missing from previous portrayals. Mary Tam's Romana was more argumentative than I remember, though in fairness it's been a long time since I've watched the Key to Time series. However, she was intelligent, witty and strong, and Tam's performance gives us a character that even those new to Doctor Who audio, or new to Doctor Who altogether, can really engage with. John Leeson features as K9 in these stories, and does a wonderful job of reprising that role as well. There's not much you can say about K9 as he is what he is, but it's fair to say that he's well written and very well played by Leeson. And unlike many of his TV outings, on audio K9 doesn't have to stay locked up in the TARDIS because he can't get across the rough ground. Tom Baker's performance was ironically probably the one I was most disappointed with overall. Initially, at least in these episodes, he really does sound his age. In fairness, there are moments of pure Fourth Doctor genius, but on other occasions we hear Baker trying to recapture some of the verbal characteristics of his Doctor, but not quite getting there. However, this is Tom Baker, and for this fanboy I'm more than happy just to imagine an older Fourth Doctor. Overall, this story is a good one, with well written and very well realised characters, and a plot that will keep you engaged throughout. While there are references to a previous story in this series, you don't have to have heard that story to understand what's going on in this one. If you've not yet listened to any Fourth Doctor audios, here would be a great place to start.
Oh, goodbye, my dear chap. I must say I've had the time of my lives.
And that's all for this week. Thanks again for tuning in, and if you have any thoughts on the Dalek contract or the final phase, do drop me a line at respectthething@outlook.com, or post your comments on Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast on Facebook. So until next week, when we start a trilogy of episodes about some of the black and white era companions... Thank you for listening to Theta Sigma's Doctor Who podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all copyright and property of the BBC, and no infringement is intended.